I was lucky enough to be asked to work on the discovery for the Enron case for our client. That was the first case that had email. There were 600,000 email, and each instance could only host 100,000. So every time we had to do a search, we had to do it 6 times, which today seems so onerous. And I learned about Control F, and I thought it was the most magical thing I'd ever seen in my life. Everyone now in the legal profession really needs to understand how AI works. Legal technologists are a very important cog in that wheel to make sure that everyone is understanding each other.
This is the Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadeo. My guest today is a visionary leader who has spent over 3 decades defining the intersection of law, technology, and strategy. She brings a rare perspective to the table, having served as a litigator at Jones Day, leading eDiscovery at Goldman Sachs, and now general counsel at Cimplifi. A recent recipient of the ALM Lifetime Achievement Award and a driving force behind the splash movement against sexual harassment, she is not just navigating the future of legal operations, she is actively defining it. It's my pleasure to welcome Marla Crawford to the podcast. Welcome, Marla, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for that warm welcome.
It's my pleasure, Marla. As you know, Marla, I love to start by asking each of my guests to share either a fun fact about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be for you, and what is it?
Fun fact.
Please.
So recently, 1 year ago, I became a grandmother, and that has really changed my perspective. You know, I'm a mom of 2 grown kids, but being a grandmother does soften some of the edges and give you more of a historical perspective on the future and the next generation and the importance of family. So I am a proud new grandmother.
Wow, what a wonderful fun fact to share. I'm sure there'll be many, many memories to come with your new grandchild. So congratulations on being a grandma. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, one of the other questions I like to ask each of my guests, Marla, is that I do sincerely believe that each attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast is a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story. And I know that you've done so many wonderful things in your career. So I would love for you to share yours with our audience.
So my father was a lawyer. He was what I call a real people lawyer. He had his own practice in Cleveland, where I'm from, and he represented families and people who had everyday problems, from personal injury to divorce. But one of his little pockets of interest was he defended some children against school boards that were not giving the children what they needed to succeed. And that was very inspiring to me. And I spent a lot of time in his office, and I watched him. He had great compassion and empathy. And it really influenced me to become a lawyer. Although his advice to me was not to become a real people lawyer, but to go more of the big firm route, and that I would gain satisfaction and it would be easier.
What a wonderful story. So you got your start early in terms of being there in your father's office and watching him help all these individuals in need. That's wonderful. So can you talk about your trajectory on actually, actualizing that belief or that interest that you had from college, law school, and then beyond?
Yes, I did go to law school, but before I went to law school, the summer before, I was a floater assistant secretary, Jones Day, Cleveland. I wasn't particularly good at it. It was, back in the 80s, and we had whiteout and carbon copies, and I had little bit of a problem with that. But I was exposed to some of the scions of the bar from Jones Day Cleveland, and I would ask them if I had the chance to give me some advice. And so what they uniformly told me was, when you go to law school in the first year, you have to put your head down and just try to do the best you can. And if you do very well, then let us know. So I did that. I went to law school, and for really a whole year, I just put my head down and studied and did the best that I could. And then I was able to go back to Jones Day and become a summer associate in that office.
That's wonderful. So did you go back to Cleveland then for
I
that
did.
role?
Yeah. I went back to Cleveland as a summer associate, and then I was an associate in the Cleveland office for a whopping 6 months. And they had just opened the New York office and were recruiting young lawyers. And so that's how I made that switch.
That's amazing. So what was your trajectory like within, now you're in Jones Day, New York. What is that looking like for you? You made the switch, you're an associate in New York. Can you walk us through your trajectory within Jones Day there?
Yes, I loved working at Jones Day. I was there for 22 years. I started out as a new associate, and I knew early on I wanted to work on litigation. So little by little, inch by inch, I worked my way into litigation, into the discovery phase of litigation. I worked on really large cases doing discovery. Johnson & Johnson Tylenol litigation, IBM chip litigation, RJ Reynolds tobacco litigation, all the very largest cases. And I really made the effort to make a name for myself that I wanted to concentrate on the discovery phase, and I wanted to work on these large matters. Part of the reason for that was because I was having kids and I was trying to balance my career between full-time work and being a mom. But also, I just liked it. I found it interesting to have the knowledge and be able to support the trial teams, having the smoking guns and knowing where they were. It was fun, like a puzzle almost. And then I was lucky enough to be asked to work on the discovery for the Enron case for our client Lehman Brothers. And that changed my whole life, my whole career, because that was the first real eDiscovery case.
Amazing. Can you walk us through what that was like? Because you shared a little bit about, why you enjoyed discovery, but maybe can you walk us through sort of the details behind, what you said, which is that changed your career. So can you walk us through sort of what the circumstances were, how eDiscovery was so much fundamentally different and better than regular discovery, and just, what did you learn along the way?
So I did start practicing law before we had computers on our desks. And I remember the first time they delivered a Wang computer to the desk, and I learned about Control F, and I thought it was the most magical thing I'd ever seen in my life. So I wasn't really a technical person. I didn't go to law school because I had any technical ability. I wasn't very good at math or science. I took a computer class in undergrad, but really wasn't for me. But I realized that learning how to use the technology made my life easier and my work product more accurate. So little by little, as I could, I tried to adopt technology as it came into the practice of law. And that was a big change for all of us. And then in the Enron case, that was the first case that had email. So I was one of a group of lawyers, young lawyers, most of us, who were meeting with the technologists, building the systems for us to host and review email. And the first system that we built, there were about 10 or 12 of us in the room. We would give the technologists, I wish it would do this. These are some requirements, and they would try to make that happen. And they needed to build 6 instances of the software because there were 600,000 email and each instance could only host 100,000. So every time we had to do a search to look for information, we had to do it 6 times, which today seems so onerous. But at that time, it was miraculous.
Wow, there's so much there, Marla. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Well, first of all, 600,000 pieces of documentation manually would just be a whole different, exponentially higher level of difficulty, I would imagine, to search through. Number one, and number two, I'm sort of putting myself in your shoes. I mean, how exciting must it have been to not only move this case forward as a matter of legal practice, but also to sit in the room and essentially build the infrastructure that would help you move that case forward. That sounds like an incredible experience. That was a major case, and that's where you got sort of a lot of experience with eDiscovery. Subsequently, you moved to Goldman Sachs. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about that transition? How did that happen? And then the work that you did at Goldman.
To be honest, I had no intention of ever leaving Jones Day. I loved working there. And fun fact, my daughter is a lawyer there now, although she's a labor and employment lawyer. But I was very happy at the firm. And then I got a call from a friend of mine who said that Goldman was looking to hire the first person to build an eDiscovery program, and could he put my resume in? So I said, sure, not really thinking twice about it. And they called to interview me. And my goal really was for them to hire me as outside counsel for me to help them build their program. I had no intention of making a move. And I interviewed with many people there over 6 months, and they offered me the job. And I wasn't going to take it. I think I was naive. I didn't really appreciate the power of having a job there. And the managing partner of the New York office, Willis Goldsmith, became aware of this. And he called me in and he said, I really think you need to take this job. And I said, I don't want to leave. This is my home. And he said, I think you're going to love it. So go, and if you don't, you can always come back. And with that freedom, I went and started to build their first eDiscovery program.
That's amazing. And it was a 6-month interview process. So they were really courting you, so to speak, for a while there. That's amazing.
It took a while, yeah.
That's great. So how did your role at Goldman building that the infrastructure there differ from the work that you did, obviously more actively involved from, I assume, the legal practice side over at Jones Day?
What was interesting is that, there were a lot of technologists at Goldman. It's very much of a tech company with their own engineers. And so there was quite a process to go through internally to get all of the internal stakeholders on board to figure out the best way for the businesses to adopt an eDiscovery program, to take more of it in-house, to make sure we were collaborating with the outside counsel who were very, very important to the process as well, and that we reached a really collaborative program so that everyone in all the stakeholders were satisfied. And that took about, let's call it a year. And then after that, I moved into the litigation group where I worked on cases, but also managed the eDiscovery program. And it was a very satisfying 11 years. And the people at Goldman are very smart, and it was a lot of fun to support the business. I would say the difference between a law firm and a corporation is a law firm is a marathon, and working in-house is more of a sprint every day.
That's a nice way to put it. So given that you mentioned it took about a year to manage this or build out the infrastructure within Goldman, given an organization of the size and scale and frankly diversity of Goldman's operations, I mean, that doesn't seem like a long time at all. So what were some of the things that you did in order to make sure that this obviously very large and important project, had stakeholder buy-in from all the various individuals and groups that were involved?
It was important to try to manage what we could do ourselves in-house, what we needed to get service providers to do, how much input we wanted our outside counsel to have, what kind of oversight. We had a really great group in legal technology who was able to bridge the gap between technologists and lawyers. I think legal technologists and legal operations professionals are a very important cog in that wheel to make sure that everyone is understanding each other, because technologists often speak one language and lawyers speak another. And also there was a great need for this. So people wanted this to happen and they wanted it to succeed. And I think at a company like that, when you want to go quickly, you can.
That's great. Again, given how big this is not a 5-person startup. This is a global and very influential and large organization. So that's impressive. Let's now talk about the next big move that you've made in your career. So you moved from Goldman to Cimplifi. Can you maybe share a little bit about what Cimplifi is, what they do, and your role within that organization?
So Cimplifi is an integrated legal services provider. We basically do eDiscovery, managed review, and contract analytics. All of this within a very tech-forward, as cutting edge as we can environment, where we're utilizing artificial intelligence, computer-assisted review, and we have a team that builds innovations on top of some of the best-in-breed software out there. My role is general counsel, so I am the only working lawyer at Cimplifi, and I think I'm very lucky to be able to be a general counsel of a company where the business is something I know so intimately. So it's very much the case that I'm also on the executive team helping to run the day-to-day of the business, and I think that I have a much better understanding because the nature of the work we do is the work I used to do than if I had just been a general counsel of some other, even if it was a tech company.
That's an interesting perspective. Yes, it sounds like a great fit because, your role, in theory, you don't need to, I would assume you don't need to be quote unquote good or deeply embedded in the e-discovery world or the legal operations world to be a general counsel at a firm. But in this case, I'm sure you bring a perspective that the rest of the organization absolutely values. So that's great. You mentioned artificial intelligence, right? And that's obviously, the elephant in every room and so on and so forth. In the same way, if I can draw this analogy, you mentioned that Control F was sort of one of the greatest things you had ever seen when you moved from your traditional paper-based discovery to e-discovery. What, in your opinion, if it exists, is the equivalent of that Control F when it comes to AI-powered discovery versus AI-powered e-discovery, versus traditional e-discovery?
I think we're at another major pivotal moment, and I'm lucky enough that I've been around for a few of these, where in an even bigger scale, AI is going to change the way we do discovery. It's going to change the way documents are reviewed. It's going to change who is doing that and at what level. It's going to change, I think, the financial structure of how clients are billed for the discovery phase of litigation. And it's going to change the ecosystem of the law, because lawyers and law schools are going to have to train differently. They're going to have to understand a lot of technology and not just the law. And it's also going to change, I think, where people can find employment in the law. So I'm not convinced. There's a lot in the press about the contraction of the practice of law, the human side of it. I don't know if that's true. I'm not convinced it's true, but I do think that there'll be a shift in where people work.
Fascinating. You shared a few things there, Marla, and I'd like to touch upon a couple of them. So one is you spoke about how eDiscovery is conducted. And so can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because one would, if I'm sort of a maybe a bit of an AI skeptic, which I'm personally not, but let's assume I am, and I'm saying, all right, I already have this. What is your AI powered eDiscovery tool going to be able to help me do that I cannot already do with my existing non AI powered tool? At a high level, can you share some things like that?
Sure. The e-discovery process is basically you collect electronic information, you process it through a review tool, you give lawyers access to the review tool. They can run limiting searches, and then they can start to review the documents either by going one by one, by running searches and looking at documents in batches, by using technology assisted review so that the computer is finding documents like the ones a human already reviewed. It then morphs into you can tell the computer what you're looking for, and that they can come back with categorization. In artificial intelligence, you are prompting the computer through the same kind of prompt engineering you would use in other aspects of AI. And the results are coming back to you without a linear sort of review. The technology is making the decisions based on the prompt. And of course, you'll have to go through iterations. Unless your prompt is perfect, which it's not going to be because you can't know everything before you start, the technology will come back and give you categorization of documents based on what you're asking for. The nice thing about the discovery tools is it will also give you the reasoning why, and you can click on the document and then see it. So you're not going to have the case of hallucinations in a review tool. Everything can be verified. And as a skeptic, I did it myself. I've run my own cases on the tools so that I could play with it and learn about it and see how the tech compares to me. So I did my own bake-off. Marla against Marla bot.
That's good.
I had to say it was magical. Really, that same sort of feeling I had all those years ago with Control F.
That's great. Another thing you mentioned there, Marla, was that you said that the nature of employment or who's employed in terms of, which lawyers do what kind of work, that might change as AI advances and as it makes its way, into tools like the ones that Cimplifi, produces and just in general across the legal field at large. So can you talk a little bit through that in two ways? One is how do you foresee, to the best of, obviously we're all sort of navigating this world together, how do you foresee those jobs changing, number one? And then number two is for a younger attorney who is sort of looking at the landscape today with all the AI and all the technology, what guidance would you have for them given today's landscape?
I think everyone now in the legal profession really needs to understand how AI works, how it can benefit you, how it can be an adjunct in your skill set, but also what to watch out for and what you have to check. So I think lawyers can be more efficient by using AI, maybe for drafting, maybe for research, for document review, for all sorts of tasks, but also to make sure the ethical responsibilities of supervision and competency are at the forefront so that the AI is a tool and they are still using their judgment to make sure everything is accurate and informed.
Absolutely. I mean, not a day goes by on LinkedIn without seeing something about some attorney somewhere being censured because of, hallucinations and so on and so forth. So I think, Marla, your guidance is a timely one. That's fantastic. So beyond that, let's, beyond the world of, Simplify and your work there and legal practice, you're also active in many ways within the community. So number one is you're the creator of the Splash movement, service providers leading against sexual harassment. And that's truly powerful. Can you talk a little bit about Splash and what motivated you to move forward with founding that organization?
There was an event at one of the legal conferences where there was an event of harassment. And then after that became public, so many women and some men came forward to talk about issues of harassment that they have been subjected to or have seen or have heard about in the industry at conferences and otherwise. And some of, but not all of, those issues involved clients and service providers one way or the other way. It wasn't really, all anyone's fault. And I just felt that I was a mature person in the industry and I had a platform as a general counsel, and my CEO supported this completely, that I could start really at that time it was a LinkedIn group called Service Providers Leading Against Sexual Harassment called Splash. And we went out on LinkedIn with it within a couple of days. And the outpouring of support was really tremendous. I couldn't believe it. And it became a way bigger movement than I was able to manage. So I combined the Splash movement with the women in eDiscovery. And then that organization went forward doing a lot of education and speaking, webinars, speaking at conferences. And recently that organization then merged in with another one called Life Preservers. So I feel very gratified that I kicked something off that had so much momentum and allowed people to be heard. And hopefully we made some great progress.
That's wonderful. I'm sure it's a great service to the community, not just the legal community, but just the professional community at large. So thank you for that. In addition to Splash, you've also been on the advisory board of a cybersecurity company. You were an advisor to CLOC, and most recently, I noticed that you also joined the member of the board. You're a member of the board of advisors of Elon University, which is due. So congratulations for that. Can you talk us through some of the work that you do in each of those, for each of those organizations or entities?
Yes. So I'm very interested and gratified by this recent invitation to be on the board of advisors of Elon Law. It dovetails in with the thoughts I've been having about the legal profession and how we train our young lawyers and how I can help by bringing my viewpoint in technology and participate with the other board members in making a modern curriculum and helping students to find opportunities and explore what their thoughts are and maybe match them up with some of my network. So, it's that same, I think, grandmother thing that happened to me that now I'm thinking about the future and the legacy and what I can do, to help people and to do things maybe that live on a little bit beyond my career span. And I'm really excited about it.
That's great. Oh, this has been a great conversation, Marla. Just a couple of quick questions to wrap us up here. So, you mentioned legacy just now, and you've already set the stage for an incredible legacy. You've won numerous awards, the ALM Lifetime Achievement, being named one of the 50 women to watch. So, looking back at your career so far, what advice would you give to a lawyer today who wants to build not just a career in maybe similar manner that you have, but also leave a legacy? They want to be a true thought leader, a change agent in law.
Sometimes success is really for some fundamental, easy things that a person can do. I try to respond to everybody who reaches out to me. I am respectful. And I think that a person should always be humble. My mother may she rest in peace, taught me that from a very early age, you should be happy with what you have because there's always going to be someone who has more and someone who has less. And that really stuck with me throughout my whole life. So I think if you just go back to the fundamentals of respect and being humble and responding to people, that you are already setting a stage where you have opened yourself up to the good things that can happen to you in your career. And of course, hard work.
Right. No, but it's so important what you just said, right? Because there's a lot of folks who put in the hours and so on and so forth, but sometimes they lose their ethical compass. And for you to share that, I think is very powerful. So I think that's a great place to end. Is there a question that I should have asked you, Marla, that I didn't?
Oh my goodness. I guess you could ask me what's next. What am I excited about?
Oh, please.
Next. And I'm really excited about the growth of our company and watching us expand. When I started at Cimplifi, we had about 60 employees. 5 years later, we're at 180. And I am really poised to watch the growth and expansion of this company that I've given so much to and I care so much about.
Wonderful. Well, all the best to you and to the company. That's great. Marla, this has been a wonderful, enlightening, and grounded conversation. I truly enjoyed listening to all your insights and your journey. So thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.